I think the macro uncertainty is a major issue for people. They know inflation is letting rip, and they know it's letting rip in costs, which has been offset this year by revenues to a significant degree with the bounce back from COVID, at least for hospitality, for hotels. But they can see a year or two ahead when you have, obviously, labor cost issues, you have supply cost issues, and you have rising interest rates. And of course, now is the time when hospitality investors are doing their budgets, and they don't really know what to put. And one of our members, we're a hotel owners association, one of our members said to me last week, in my 20 years in the industry, I have never found it so hard to do a budget. I mean, you have a perfect storm. Obviously, labor cost is the biggest single cost. And in many markets, it's Asia as well as Europe, you can't get the staff. People who went off during COVID and, rode Uber bikes or worked from home and set up an internet business don't necessarily want to come back to an industry where the hours are regimented, you're working weekends and so on. And where a lot of it is very heavily structured. So you're within a very tight framework for what you can do every day. So a lot of people enjoyed their freedom, found it much cheaper to live at home out in the provinces of Thailand or back home in the north of England, rather than having to do the rents in the capital cities. So there's a big labor problem, and obviously cost, the way you solve that is you pay more. So labor costs are up 30% in the hotel industry. That's a lot. I'm sure in care homes and student accommodation services, it's similar. So there's a big cost pressure with labor. There's also a big massive cost pressure with energy, as we all know. And then supply chain has got really expensive too. So inflation on the cost side has been brutal. Now, as I say, in short-term rental businesses, you significantly offset that with revenues. I mean, hotel prices are up double in some cities. So this year hasn't been too painful. But people know that consumer spending next year will be hurt. And so they're really worried about what 23 will look like. And of course, they're paying, people have got used to basically zero interest rates. Yeah. And now they're going to start paying 4%, 5%, 6%, and they're not used to it.
Yeah, and the central banks gave the impression, of course, that those zero interest rates would remain in perpetuity, and then suddenly the rates are up. The Fed keeps putting up.
Right. I'm old, so the reality is, for me, this is back to normal. I grew up in an era of sort of 15% inflation and 17% interest rates back in the 70s. So people were accustomed to it, and now they're not. And what I heard here at OpRE is that they can see interest rates going up, but they think inflation will moderate and come back down. And so obviously your real profits get squeezed at that point. And that's what I think all sectors of operational real estate are worried about. I think people are trying to diversify. I mean, interestingly, the hospitality real estate community was out on its own. It was seen as very high risk. Now, with inflation, you can push prices daily. I think more institutions are moving into hospitality. And equally, some of the traditional hospitality investors are going, well, you know what? Actually, it's a safer long-term revenue stream in service departments, in student accommodation and healthcare. So they're reaching out that way. So there's a merging of the two. And then, of course, you're getting branded resi. So your resi side is also moving into a branded hospitality world. So yes, there's a big coming together of the different investment groups.
And what's the mood within the investment community as well? Or is there still an appetite for investing in these categories?
For sure, yes. I mean, people can see they bounced well out of COVID, they survived, and they do have the ability to reprice daily, which is great in an inflation environment.
Mm-hmm. And so your outlook for the sector is still quite rosy despite the maelstrom that we're going through?
I think, again, it's down to fundamentals. If you look at student accommodation, student numbers keep growing around the world. If you look at healthcare, especially care homes, elderly people, the demographics keep pushing that for decades to come. You look at travel, I don't know about post-COVID, but from the Second World War onwards, it's grown in volume, not value, but in volume terms, 4 or 5% a year. So they're all sectors with fundamental long-term growth. They may have a blip for a year or two, but they'll be fine.